I'd like to introduce to you Sean Moyer, the chair of the defense track.
I consider myself to be, typically either like a piece of shaker furniture, or maybe a primitivist, like something made out of driftwood, what kind of chair Barbara Walters would ask me that I'd like to be. So actually, the thing that I'm actually really excited about the defense track is that I think that we're thinking about a lot of things in a good way. And as somebody who, and maybe that was just me, who gave a lot of defense talks to empty rooms, it's pretty awesome to see all these people in the room. So that's really great. One thing that, since they slapped our names on these things and we're all kind of accountable for some of this content, and I'm not worried about Ian in this regard, but I want all of you that stay in this room all day to promise me this. I'm not gonna, my boy Marcus, thanks for coming here instead, but my boy Marcus says cyber war is bullshit. I'm not gonna say cyber war is bullshit, but I have made a solemn promise to everyone that if you say the word cyber, that's an instant fail on the CFP. I've promised people this for a long time. So what I would like everyone to do, in case we let one slip, like an F-bomb, you just, you drop a cyber, is if you hear the word cyber, I want all of you to scream bullshit, okay? So we're gonna practice. So cyber. Bullshit. Cyber. Bullshit. Cyber defense information arena. Oh, fantastic, fan-fucking-tastic. So, all right, well, so with no further ado, Ian Amit from our good friends at IOActive, actually, among other things, who's been in our line of work for a very long time and is a very interesting fellow. It has a fantastic slide deck, actually, that I'm really excited about. So everybody give him a round of applause, and thanks for coming out.
All right. Hi, everyone. All right, I'm super excited to be here, so excuse me if my voice tremors a little bit. It's always like the first time, so. So thanks for coming to the, wow, there's a lot of you. Thanks for coming to the defense track. As Sean said, this is really exciting to see a lot of people interested in defense, which for me is a huge problem that we really didn't solve correctly for a long time, and we've been ignoring it in various creative ways along the years. So hopefully this will start a movement or start a new way of thinking about defense. This is what we're gonna endure in the next 60 minutes or so. We're gonna talk about the background that led to this rant, research, demonstration, whatever it is. Talk a little bit about the methodology and kind of the best practices, or sorry. That's almost as bad as cyber. But thank you. A little bit about the methodologies and terminology behind this and how to actually work correctly on the defensive side. We're going to see some examples, which for me are really exciting because it took me a long time to set them up, because I had to set them up from scratch, because I couldn't use my original ones, long story short. And then finish up with some conclusions. So this is me. I am not certified to do anything, so yeah. Regardless, I do have a job, like a real job in the industry, which still surprises me every time I get a new one. Recently with IOActive, I'm a hacker by trade, nature, training. A researcher, focused a lot on digging into security and in all of its aspects. I'm a really, really bad developer. My code runs on my machine and my machine only. It's the best licensing scheme ever. It just works. Part of my research in the past has been focused mainly on cybercrime and just testing you. And looking really behind the scenes and how things actually work, not just the exploits and the toolkits and stuff like that. I've also that kind of led me into looking at warfare. Because they're really connected, and it's a long story. I highly recommend looking at that research. In my spare time between job and hacking and researching, I helped found and currently run the local DEF CON group in Tel Aviv in Israel. started the PTES, the Penetration Testing and Execution Standard, which if you are not familiar with, the doors are there. And in the spare time that I have, I also do some reserve duty for the Israeli Air Force. And last but not least, dirty security. So some background, how did I get here to present to you this research? I'm working a lot with companies and organizations in trying to fix or assess their security posture. And a lot of times I see the following scenario. Someone had a vulnerability assessment done, because usually they have to. And then again, like a real pen test that stresses the limits of vulnerabilities and looks for new ways to see if the organization can actually pass a pen test. And some of them actually pass a pen test, and they usually get from it compliance, because compliance says that you have to pass a pen test once every whatever. But the downside is that the security posture hasn't really changed, because we all know that pen tests, the way they are built and executed in most times, are just designed to pass a compliance test. And some of the organizations who are really diligent and really want to test their security even get a red team test, which is my kind of pet peeves and my specialty. And then everything kind of breaks because the red team comes along and they play, according to no rules, and they actually get stuff done. And most organizations go through this. It's like, but we passed the pen test. We're compliant. And then, no, something's wrong here. It's, you didn't play by the rules. This is, we are compliant. We are protected. We had an IPS and a firewall, an antivirus, an anti-whatever. So it can be true. You must be doing something wrong. Your data is incorrect. This is not our data that you just exfiltrated through whatever. And some of them, usually when a unicorn passes flying across the sky, pooping rainbows, actually get to a point of, you know what, you're right. Let's look at that report. Let's see exactly what you did and kind of figure out how to fix that from the organization perspective, technology, processes. Yeah, not seeing a lot of that, unfortunately. So how to fix that? So this is kind of my starting point. And what I usually like to do is to start with the bad reports, because most reports are bad. Again, I've written tons of them. I know, I admit it. We're usually constrained by requirements and scope and whatever it is. But there are some goodies that you can get from a report to help you start building a proper defensive strategy. All right? They're not just for compliance. So here comes the boring part. Bear with me for like 4.5 minutes while I'll trudge through this. We're going to talk about vulnerability, exposure, threat, risk, all those fancy words that the keynote also mentioned. And yes, you have to be able to talk that terminology to get the money. Otherwise, you're just the geek speaking binary with no budget. So vulnerability, you'll see a lot of those in reports, like pages, reams and reams of pages of vulnerability reports in pen testing and vuln assessments. It basically boils down to software components that correlate to logic and operation issues, whether in computer system, processes, procedures, and everything related to the business. Now, see how we moved from software towards processes and people and operations, right? Vulnerabilities, it's important to remember, especially when you're doing proper defense, is not just about software bugs, okay? They're nice, they're fun to work with, to fuzz, to detect, to report, to get into the Microsoft party, whatever it is, but it's not about security. Right? Security is a little broader than that, and you need to be able to understand that. Some reports will actually have process flaws and logic flaws that doesn't necessarily correlate to a specific software. And then there's exposure. Huh? We're just talking about vulnerabilities. Well, exposures are the way to connect vulnerabilities to a threat model. Vulnerabilities don't just stand by themselves and need to be fixed at any cost. Forget it. All right? You need to have context to be able to prioritize, all right? Because at some point the budget's going to run out and you can't fix any more vulnerabilities. So you need to figure out what's the exposure for a certain threat to a specific vulnerability. Speaking about threat, it's basically anything that can take down your business. Okay? And I'll leave it at that. You usually have to define threat by identifying the threat community or the threat agent, their capabilities, and accessibility to the asset, accessibility to information assets and intelligence assets in your organization. You have to think about it in that way. Again, Sean talked about it before. This is part of actually doing defense. You can't just sit there in your cubicle setting up firewalls and antiviruses expecting everything to be protected from everyone. It's pointless. It's a moot discussion. You need to identify what kind of threats you're facing so that you can adjust your defenses to them. And no one organization will have the same security strategy as another one because they're facing different threats. And then that leads us to risk. We all know the formula. Risk is basically a probability. Okay? It's a technical mathematical term that you need to defend, that you need to be able to get back to, just like any other math formula, through different ways that you need to prove, and do that in a logical, repeatable, defensible manner. All right? It's not just, yeah, I think our risk is high here. Excellent. And how does that compare to the critical or medium or low? I mean, forget those lights and classifications. Try to work with numbers so you can actually, it's a little mental exercise, but it really helps you a lot towards defining what you're actually trying to protect and how bad is it right now. So let's take a look at the methodology and how we've done things. So we're done with the terminology and we're off to the fun part. So we've been doing defense for a long time. And unfortunately, we've been doing defense the same way for a very, very long time. This is how most companies' defenses look like these days. We're using firewalls the same way that people have been using walls in the Middle Ages. We're using the same kind of perimeter defenses and more internal defenses the same way that we've been using them for decades. And at some point, we lost the realization that all those defenses, all those walls are actually obstructing our view, and we're just relying on them and expecting things to come from a very, very narrow perspective. It's like, because I have this firewall and this IPS and this antivirus, I only have to worry about this much that might sneak through. Okay? That would be correct if all the vendors would have their shit done correctly, but they don't. On the other hand, this is the attacker view. This is what we're used to seeing when we're doing pen tests and red team testing and all that fun stuff, which is everything. Right? I see your defenses, I see your assets, I see your guards going to the bar when they're done for the night, I see your CEO on social media, I see your R&D talking on development forums, on the technologies that they're using and what they're developing. I basically see everything. And what you see is that little slit through your defenses. And it basically means, I've stolen this from the penetration testing execution standard, that from an attacker perspective, I have a lot to cover. I have a huge spectrum, starting with intel gathering before I even step foot 100 miles from your organization. I do intel gathering. I do vulnerability research. Again, because I know what software you're using. I know what kind of defenses you're using without sending a single packet to your firewall. So I can already start researching vulnerabilities on those systems. And then I develop an exploit that actually works, running on your network or organization. establish some kind of control model, and run some post-exploitation, exfiltration on your company. And again, as we've seen before, sometimes even for years before you actually realize that, that you're owned. From the defender perspective, this is what we've been doing for a long time. We're doing detection and mitigation and containment. Great. So this has been our spectrum of focus in terms of defense. And this is what we need to do proper defense. We need to start, as I said before, with threat modeling. How does my organization fare up against adversaries? Who are those adversaries? What are my assets that I'm protecting? What are my protections? What are my defenses and how effective they are? Again, without even starting to analyze things, just put everything in a model and figure out what the hell am I doing here? Am I putting my defenses correctly? Am I layering them correctly? Am I compartmentalizing, whatever, my assets so they are accessible only by the people who actually need access to them? And then do some intelligence gathering on myself, because I dare not think that I know everything about my organization. How do I work? How do I look to an outside attacker? So I do intelligence gathering on myself and on my threat communities, because you need to realize, you need to study your opponent before you start putting up defenses against such opponent. Otherwise, you're just throwing money at blue lights and appliances and software. And then correlate data. We're sitting on tons of data that's super useful for us as defenders to tune our defenses, to actually see breaches, right? To get that loop much, much tighter in terms of detecting and mitigating and realizing that someone is out there to attack us before they actually send their exploits. And it's really hard because we need to remember that it's not about, and this room is full of egos, all right? It's not about egos, it's not about people, and it's not even about their skills, all right? As a defender, it's meaningless if you hire the best cyber threat analyst or reverser or developer. It's about how to use them in the right context of your business. Because they're useless if they're just putting all their efforts on some piece of software that's got nothing to do with the business. The business can lose and not even care about. We need to remember that it's not fair. It really isn't not fair. I've played both Red Team as well as Defender for a long time, and Red Team is much more fun because it's just not fair. I'm not playing by anyone's rules. I'm playing by my rules. And I will get into your organization, especially if you're not ready. So forget about fair, forget about rules and is this correct or not, because your attacker doesn't care about it. It's about having a mindset of constant improvement. Again, Sean said before, realize that you're owned. Realize that the aggressor is already inside. And now start thinking about building your defenses, about what to do, about how to handle that, and about mitigating those gaps, closing those gaps that led them in, that allowed them to get in and stay in for that amount of time. It's about identification, remediation, and again, in the context of risk. It's not about, I found a bug, let's fix it. Bullshit. It's about, I found a bug, do I care about it? Okay? It's about someone rooted our Linux server, some web server. Okay, so I'll re-image it. I don't care about it because it's somewhere in the perimeter. It's just a stupid web server. It's got nothing to do with my business. So why should it get a critical or a high in a pentest report when it's got nothing to do with my business? My cost of replacement is clicking on Amazon's AMI and just re-image, bam, done. So let's talk a little bit about mapping. Mapping is a tricky business because we're all biased. And mapping needs to be done, as I said before, in the context of the business, in the context of what am I protecting and how does my business work. How do I make money? A lot of people that I talked to in the past working in security don't even know what their organization is doing. They didn't take the time to lift their eyes above the screen and figure out, wow, it's a pretty big place. This is Black Hat. I'm trying to tone down on the... it's a pretty big place. What pays all those people? What's the business? How do we make money? And once you realize that, only once you realize that, you can start working to protect that machine, that moneymaker. And that includes processes, assets, people, technology, third parties, physical assets, everything. Again, it's not just about technology and firewalls and networks and wireless and whatnots. So you need to map your security assets as well. Again, you already have stuff in the network, correct? Gotta have firewalls and antiviruses and whatnots that make those companies make money. And map your intelligence assets. How do I feed this machine that helps me defend my organization? How do I feed this organization, my business, to help it make more money? So you need to realize where all those assets are because you want to use them correctly and not just throw money at a vendor that puts a box with blinking lights on it to make everyone happy. Once you have that done, you can start moving over to mapping exposures and issues. All right, so this is the first time that in the process that we even looked at vulnerabilities. Okay, because the first stage was to figure out what the hell am I protecting. So again, start with a report, some vulnerability assessment, PT, red team, whatever it is, and work your way up while weeding out all those Linux servers that get owned and unnecessary information that I don't really care about because it's not costing me money and it's not going to hurt my business and I don't care about. So this is kind of a very simplified example of a threat model or mapping of assets, processes, people, vulnerabilities, and controls. It's basically, again, it's looking at the business from a business perspective. How do those processes work? So I have people interacting with other people, with technology, with third parties, and I'm mapping out vulnerabilities, not necessarily in software, but also with processes, but also with people and organizations that I work with. And again, I said it before, I'm going to say it again, map the threats. Without understanding, after you mapped all your business and you know how it works, now figure out who's out there to get you. Competitors, hackers, criminal organizations, governments, whatever fear, uncertainty, and doubt that anyone else will sell you. Make sure that it correlates with your model, make sure that it's relevant, and start identifying them. Start learning them. Who is it out there, all right? Is it a group? Is it a person? Is it an entity? What are their capabilities? What should I expect when this threat community attacks me versus another threat community? It's going to be completely different because they have different capabilities, different modus operandi, as we call it, different intelligence on what they know about me and how they're going to use it. And you have to get into their heads and map out how they operate and how they think so you can adapt your defenses accordingly. Logs. I love logs. This is the best investment that you can make in your security strategy. It's data. It's storage. All right? We're going old school. The more logs you have, and you have shitloads of logs, believe me, you're just not using them correctly, the better you will be prepared to answer those questions that I've raised before about your threats, about your assets, about your exposures, vulnerabilities, whatever it is. Because you have all that information lying there, and no one is really looking at it in the right context. All right? Someone might be looking at like domain controller logs and Windows logs and Linux logs and web server logs to find very, very specific issues of load, of crashes, of whatever it is. But no one's really correlating all that stuff. I've landed in McCarran here. I've seen the SIM 2.0. I think we need to be at like SIM 18.5. We're really, really far from really doing something effective with all that data. So do it yourself. It's not a big deal, trust me. In the cost of a couple of those SIM devices, you can hire a couple of good people with some Python skills and some hacking skills that will go through chunks of logs and data and information that we'll talk about later and actually make sense out of it to your organization, because that blinking light box doesn't fit the same way to your organization as it does to other organizations, all right? So you need to be able, that's cool, to tune that data to your needs, to your assets. Intelligence, this is fun. Intelligence is key, and you can get it from many different places, not just RSS feeds or forums or whatever it is. You can get it from marketing and sales. Talk to the people that run the business and ask them about what is it out there against the competitors, all right? When I'm up against, when I'm shortlisted against someone else, why did I lose? Really? What is it that my competitor knows about me that I didn't know that he knows about me that got him to win that deal? All right? Look at business development. Again, the guys that are out there to look outside the company, outside the organization, and figure out how to move that big business into new areas. Partners, competitors, customers. These are all untapped resources that we're just not using, we're just ignoring when we're building a defensive strategy. This is something that we need to take into account and feed back into this wonderful machine that hasn't been built yet, that's been scripted and hacked in many, many other places to a state where it actually works, taking in all that information and crunching it to a context that fits my business. Look at early warning signs. Again, talking about logs and talking about behavior inside the organization. From the classic, my PC is slow, booting up takes like 15 minutes, not just on BlackBerries, also on PCs. Looking at indicators on other departments, like call volume to support, physical elements around the office, stuff that's changing that we're not really taking account of that might be relevant to our security posture, all right? Because physical access will correlate eventually to getting access to my network. Trust me. Sales inquiries. You'll see a lot of them here, all right? You'll walk around here. You'll get into drunk conversation with other hackers and people. We're going to ask you a lot of questions about your business and how many people do you have and what kind of products do you work on. It's the same questions that salespeople get all the time. And realizing that some questions might be related to intelligence gathering done on you. Probes on the website, this is the classic stuff. File permission changes throughout the network. All sorts of early warning signs that you need to be able to account for and reflect back in how you deal with security internally. My favorite, people. People are hackable just as well as computers are. Look out for stalkers, tailgaters, people who try to scope out your environment, scope out your business. Potential customers coming in, asking questions, dressed in suits, speaking the lingo, and then leaving with tons of information about how you operate and what does your business look like, and how many open sockets do you have on your network on the walls. Smokers. I smoke in conferences and mainly when I'm overseas, mainly because I need to mingle with other people who smoke. Okay, it's part of, anyone will tell you, it's part of red teaming. It's find a smoker corner, light a fag for UK friends, and strike a conversation, maybe walk back with them. Construction sites, sales leads, IT guys. These are all people who hold a lot of information and a lot of areas where you can find data on your organization, and you need to take account of it. All right? You need to be able to train back those people to identify those behaviors. And then correlate. Again, this is the magical box that correlates everything. There's stuff out there that can be used, even simple stuff that's been hacked and scripted to take into account everything that we've talked about so far. Anything from surveillance cameras to just random information fed in from RSS feeds, local news, sports, entertainment, everything that correlates to what your business does and where it does it. All right, in what country, in what time zone, in what time of the year are you doing business? There are a lot of elements that may affect whether you're going to be targeted next or not. And then you can actually start building your defensive mojo, right? Only at this point you can start putting up the defenses because you have the information. Until then, again, you're just giving free money to vendors that convinced you to buy this box or software. It's training people. It's investing in people to identify those things. You can't just sit there and monitor everything by yourself and try to walk the aisles and figure, oh, you haven't been here before. You moved here. Oh, you're the new guy. Never mind. It's training people to figure out what's going on and alert you or the organization about stuff that's changing. And then combining technology into the mix. Okay, technology comes last. And of course, never forget to work with others. You're not alone out there. Your organization is unique. It's okay, it's special, but there are others like it with some differences, and they face the same situation. So share information with the government, with intelligence resources, vendors, customers, competitors, as I said. Look at the AV industry. There's a lot of sharing between competitors because they realize that it's actually beneficial for them. And then assess where you are. Okay? Then you can get some kind of test to verify everything that you've gathered so far to make sure that you have the right information and that you can account for it and build on top of that. And that's never going to end. That's the happy, sad part. All right? It's sad because it's never going to end. It's happy because it's kind of our job security. There is no security strategy. There is no book that you can say, there you go, boss. This is our security strategy. That's bullshit. All right? Your strategy is always going to adapt, change, move, because your business does, because your opponents do. All right? Because your assets come and go, and you keep developing new stuff, and you merge in new companies, and you partner with new third parties. So never accept a sign-off on such a strategy. All right? Just show how you can adapt that kind of strategy to the business that keeps changing. And then again, align outwards. Compare with peers. Keep track of what's new on the offensive side. This is what you're all doing here, okay? But you're on the wrong track because you're in defense. And how it actually relates to you. Never accept a successful audit or compliance. For me, compliance is a side effect of doing defense correctly, all right? It's never the goal. When it is, it usually proves the opposite. Because when compliance is your goal, you're basically thriving to be in one with the lowest common denominator of your industry. How fucked up is that? It's like, yeah, we're compliant. We're really bad, like everyone else. And again, it's not about people or technology. It's about this thing that I keep calling this magical box. It's basically cat herding. So let's look at some examples of taking a little more initiative on your defensive posture. Counterintelligence. This may sound a little, not hostile, but aggressive, but there are ways to do that correctly and effectively to actually get something out of your defensive strategy than just sitting out there and waiting for the IDF to tell you that, oh, you've been owned for a couple of weeks now. It's owning up to your information, first and foremost. Okay? The subtitle of this presentation is taking advantage of the home field. Right? It's your territory. You own it. You know it. Use it against your opponent. Set traps. Intelligence traps, technology traps, whatever it is, it's your data. It's your home turf. Use it to your advantage. You can go to lengths such as, and we'll see some examples, like booby trapping tools, working with law enforcement. And again, most important, legal. Law is hackable, probably more than technology. You'll be surprised. And it's actually fun. Once you get the right lawyers with the right state of mind, it can be a lot of fun because it really expands on what you're focused on into law and international stuff and corporate interesting information. So let's see some examples on how we actually did some of that stuff in the past to get results, to get actionable results to the organizations that we worked with in terms of mitigating the threats before they even materialized and be better prepared for them. This is one example where a threat community has been identified, and again, we kind of profiled how they're acting, where did they get their information with, who they're associating with, the tools, the forums that they're hanging out with in, and then socialize with them, for lack of better terms. Get into that forum under a false identity or under an assumed identity of someone else, and start manipulating stuff, all right? Tools are constantly published on those forums. What stops you from publishing your own tools or modifying tools that other people developed if you know that your threat community is going to use it against you? You can make it leave a distinct signature, for example. And then you can tune your defenses to identify that signature that no AV or IPS or IDS is ever going to identify, because this is like a brand new tool and it's been used 5 times. And then, again, kick back, watch the fun. It's a lot of fun when you actually own up to the information, to the intelligence on your threat communities, because it gives you so much more room for action than just sitting and waiting for your network to be owned. So here's a quick example. This is a forum where a lot of bad guys hang out at. And someone published there a neat little tool called NJRAT. It's a Trojan with screenshots and all that fun stuff. Let's say that at some point, we took that rat and we infected it with itself, which is pretty cool because no one downloading this is ever going to scan it for, like on an antivirus to find out that it's got, because it's a Trojan. All we had to do is get into hack or manipulate, whatever it is, that person's profile so we can log in as the poster, download the tool, modify it, re-upload it onto the same link, and everyone who downloads that from that point on basically connects back to, and runs the tool, basically connects back, and we own them before they even started creating the Trojan. Another example, Dark Comet. A really popular tool has been until our friends in Syria started using it for their action. They actually use this to gather intelligence on Syrian civilians. As a result of that, the creator of Dark Comet pulled it off, stopped development, and said, I'm not doing this anymore. I feel bad about it. The governments are using this, blah, blah, blah. But guess what? A lot of people still miss that tool. because it really provided a solid foundation to playing around and creating rats and Trojans and all that fun stuff with some modifications that they would put into them and run against their adversaries. So people are going to look for it, and they're going to really want to get a version, like the latest version, which is not accessible anymore from the actual publisher website. So here's a little, and this is of course, this is post modifications. The actual client's NDA did not eventually allow for the actual tool that we modified to be shown here. So I picked on another one, but you'll get the idea. The point is to use the tools in a way, or to use a modus operandi that fits your threat community. All right, you're not going to attack them with super secret, custom-made Trojan. You're going to attack them with the same tools that you're using, so you're not going to raise any red flags on their side. So here's a quick, oh, this looks like shit. So this is our copy of Dark Comet. As you can see, it's fully functional, it's working. You can see in a second. This is the latest version that was published until it was pulled off the air. I can probably speed through that a little bit. And what we did here is actually use one of the tools published with Dark Comet. It's called Celesty-Binder, that takes any number of files, puts them into one executable, and basically runs them one after the other. And we're using that to pack Dark Comet itself and a Meterpreter executable. Okay? So we're running Meterpreter first, and then Dark Comet again. The person downloading this is not going to run an AV scan on it to make sure that it's not infected with anything, because it's that anything. It's going to be infected. So we're saving that under a new name, and as you'll see in a second, we're packing it. This is a cool tool because it does actually sometimes bypass a lot of AV signatures that might detect the original stuff that was in it. So we're running Dark Comet. We have a Meterpreter listener on the other side. This is what we're going to publish or republish as the new tool somewhere online. And as you can see, it's fully functional. It's running. It's got the same functionality and all of that fun stuff. But when we look back at our Meterpreter shell, yeah, I didn't cut that because I was, of course, there's no sessions. We see that we actually own the system used by the bad guy that downloaded our tool. So this is kind of neat because now you can actually gather intelligence on whoever's downloading this tool from the forum that you posted it in, that you know your threat communities use to get information on when they're going to go after you. Here's another quick example. This was a crypter that's used, again, to take those Trojans created by Dark Comet and other rats like it and make them more sustainable or susceptible from antiviruses and signatures. So in this demo, what's not shown here is the actual fact that we enhanced the crypter because it really didn't do its job correctly. It still left like 5 or 6 antiviruses that still detected the sample after it was crypted. So we fixed that. But we made it leave a unique signature in the executable that it created so that we can detect that signature back on our IDSs and IPSs so we can see when that unique tool is being used against us. Again, this is a very simplified form. I was not allowed eventually to release the actual modification to the crypter, but we're seeing here that we are creating a crypted file. I'm taking here, excuse the slow typing, but I'm taking a putty and creating a crypted version of it. It's fully functional, it's working. It just went through some basic packing and encrypting. And if you look at the modified version that was also created, you'll see that the cryptor, we modified the cryptor to basically find code caves inside the executable, just stuff that's blank, unusable, and inject some kind of signature into it. Again, this is very simplified. It just says, I'm right here, in ASCII. So we can take that hex signature, that binary signature, and look for it anywhere on our network, anywhere on our perimeter, anywhere on our web proxies or email filters, so that if that cryptor is used against us, we'll know in advance that this is it, and we can stop it, and we can track it back to that specific attacker. So again, this is an example from the actual running code. What you're seeing here is we've uploaded both versions of the encrypted file into a web server. We're downloading them. In the meanwhile, we're taking PCAPs. I'm going to speed through that so I won't waste our time too much. So we have PCAPs of both standard crypted tool, output, and the modified crypted output. Excuse me. Just going to let it play for a second before I. All right, so these are our PCAPs. We had this is an example of a snort rule created with the unique signature that we injected into the binaries, so we can happily detect it. Run snort on the original PCAP, that's the unmodified crypted file. Nothing comes up. And run snort again with the same rule set on the rigged PCAP, and we can see that it easily identifies that that file was downloaded and that we've got company, and we need to do something about it. How cool is that, huh? Again, I cannot say that too many times. Get legal advice. Okay? There are many ways to do it, and they're all creative and fun, but just doing it like this is going to get you into a lot of trouble. Adhere to the laws of where you operate, of where you're a citizen in, of where your company is registered at, and other companies. And again, there are tons of ways to do that. Take example from Microsoft. Again, the Breeder Lab takedown was a phenomenal show of not just technical savviness of bringing down a huge botnet, but on the way they actually did it. Right? They couldn't just go out there and bring down the servers, right? That would be illegal. But they found a legal loophole that by using trademark infringement claims, they could actually take down the botnet and access all of those infected computers and run things on them. That's insane, right? Kudos to the Microsoft lawyers. It's unbelievable. So again, get legal advice and use it. Get the right lawyers. Get the ones that are like, oh, you can't really do that, but if we set up a company and yeah, when you see that spark in the eyes, grab them. Some more examples. This is one of my favorite honeypots, Kippo. Anyone familiar with Kippo? All right, look at the raised hands and ask those people after the session what Kippo does. It's really fun. You can see it in action here. It's basically a honeypot that simulates an SSH session on a Linux server. This is kind of the Kippo replay, log replayer that allows you to kind of interactively see the actions that we're taking on that Kippo box. So the attacker is trying to run all sorts of commands, and it doesn't work, and it works. And you can find a lot of these online. You can find a lot of tools that these guys are using, like rootkits and and other tools that they're usually downloading to the boxes that they popped. So again, you have a chance to learn on new tools that are being used by attackers. And you can also find a lot of guys that log in there and really get frustrated trying to figure out it doesn't really work the way it should be. So it's fun and games and work. Highly recommended to set up a few of those. Again, in the right context. If you're an all Microsoft shop and you suddenly have a Kippo box running SSH on it, that's not really gonna look good. This is getting frustrated. RM-RF and stuff is still there. Artillery. A good friend, David Kennedy, wrote this probably in a drunken stupor. But this is, again, a phenomenal tool for defenders to be able to set up on their networks and entice people to touch all those funny things. Artillery basically opens up listeners on all sorts of network ports, and anything that touches artillery gets flagged and blacklisted, and then you can actually feed it back, use artillery to feed back into your IDSs and firewalls and whatnots to create, again, a closer, tighter intelligence loop that actually uses behavior from the outside that you're certain that is malicious, that is aggressive against you, and mitigate it on the spot. You can download it from Dave's site. And everything that we've done now had nothing to do with the technology inside, right? I didn't talk about firewalls and blacklists and IPSs, because only now is the phase that you actually can put that into play because you have all the information you need, all right? You know the signatures, you know your adversaries, you know the tools that they're using, you know your assets, so you can focus on protecting them correctly. And again, use everything to your advantage. Financial information, semantic data, Google alerts, anything. Just feed everything into that Splunk or whatever engine you're inclined to use and try to get intelligence on it. Here's a quick example. I'm going to run through this so I won't run out of time. We had a problem with one of our customers, financial institutions, where they figured out that someone's using dormant accounts for fraud and or money laundering. They weren't really sure. And this is kind of a problem description. They found out the accounts that were dormant over a year and are still active, because they usually get deactivated after like a year and a half or 2 years of dormancy in that specific situation, were used for money laundering and international transfers. And they weren't sure if it's an internal or external adversary, right? Excuse me. So what we did there, again, there's just huge lack of information, is take that account and create some more fake accounts that we've tagged and put them in a list. Now, this list is unique because most dormant account lists are accounts to be disabled that are at least a year and a half or 2 years dormant. And in this list, we included accounts that are only a year dormant, so they're lucrative to the attacker. And we placed it in several places, in several segments of the organization: marketing, accounting, actual branch management and branches. And again, this is kind of booby-trapped information. It's classic counterintelligence. You can find it in any spy book that you'll read, but it's really effective when you're trying to weed out where your attacker comes from, and just wait for someone to touch that information. In that specific case, it was an internal user who was accessing or found that account list and was accessing those accounts and tried to manipulate them in the same method that the fraud worked before. That obviously triggered the alert on our side. We started investigating, and again, so far we're not doing anything. We're not stopping the operation. We look at the PC, we run some forensics on it, and we found a Trojan on it. So that actually kind of clears the internal user. But at that point, we have a Trojan running in our network. excuse me, that we know is being controlled from the outside and running actual financial fraud on this specific institution effectively for quite some time. Again, we're not disturbing anything here, right? We're making sure not to move too many parts, so the fraud continues on. We track it back to a command and control center in Eastern Europe, which is like the classic, obviously bad guys hangout. And from that point on, we not only cleared the guy working for us, because it wasn't really his fault. They were just using his PC in a very legitimate looking way from the inside because it was backdoored, but also worked with law enforcement to actually prosecute. So we're seeing something actually effective coming out of a defensive posture. And again, this is exactly the point to remind you, play nice with others, certs, governments, peers, competitors, because you'll see a lot of advantages when you work with them. Again, this case specifically is a good example that it makes it much more effective. You work with law enforcement, you take down that group, all right? So it's not going to happen anymore in this specific setup. So it's actually working for you, not just an IDS saying, clean that computer. This is a very Zen conclusion. I'm sorry for the kind of bullshit, but it really is. The whole is greater than the sum of its elements. It's not just picking technologies and solutions. It's figuring out how the business works and then starting to build defenses inside of it. This is my call for action for vendors. Start doing actual shit and listening to your customers and not trying to fit kind of a one size fits all for everyone. Understand that you need to communicate with information, that you need to process things that are not just software and bugs. Loosely typed data, language processing abilities, so you can actually work with intelligence and turn it into something that I can use defensively. And again, correlation across sources and across time. I need to be able to look at the timeline and find the story in it. For defenders, own up to your data. Come on, there's no point of just cherry picking products and saying, all right, that looks best practice, that'll protect me. Own up to your data and be proactive about it. Gather intelligence on your adversaries and on yourself. Realize how do you look to an adversary and fix that stuff. And then focus defenses on assets, not on best practice, not on CISP, whatever book. I've never read it, but and forget those best practices. They're best for everyone, but not for you. And take the initiative. Again, it's not a cuss word, and you can do a lot of stuff with legal, sorry, to be a little more proactive on your defensive strategy. That's it for me. Thank you very much.